My name is Trinh Mai, and I'm a social worker with the Resiliency Center with UHealth and also with Wellness and Integrative Health, which serves all of the U, as well as community folks that are patients of the U. So lovely to see you here. Thank you for attending. I'm going to start with actually just having us. I just attended the panel discussion and was very inspired and by the panelists that I actually came here late. But one of the pieces of information that really resonates with me is about connecting and starting with connecting with yourself as part of the healing process. So I'd like to invite us to connect with ourselves first before we connect with one another. And the other word that kept coming up in the panel was acknowledge, right? Acknowledge and speaking truth. So we're going to do a practice called stop. And it's an invitation to actually stop and look inward and see the truth of how you're doing. And actually acknowledge that. Okay, so it's how are you? And then giving yourself a moment to listen and connect with yourself. And then you'll just acknowledge how you're feeling, and then we'll proceed. And I'll ask you to maybe identify one or two intentions for our time together. Okay, I'll guide us. It's an acronym that's STOP. S stands for stop. T is take a breath. O is observing openly, and then P is proceeding with intention. Yeah, any questions? Okay, so just sit back, right? A lot of times we're leaning forward, we're leaning in, we're engaging, we're listening, we're problem solving. So give yourself a moment to just sit back in the chair. Close your eyes if that feels good, or just lower your gaze, and we'll hit the stop button together. It helps to stop with community because it's, you know, our culture doesn't really encourage stopping. So we'll hit the stop button and just feel what it's like to give yourself a moment after a busy week and a busy Friday. Take a couple breaths and actually feel the inhalation and the complete exhalation. You can even give yourself a big sigh if that feels good. And then as you take another breath, on the exhale, can you release what isn't needed right now? So scanning the body, the jaw muscles, the mouth, the shoulders, the neck, the hands, stomach, just releasing what can be released. And then observe openly, how are you? So learning and practicing seeing the truth clearly, even within ourselves, and welcoming what you find with the spirit of curiosity and friendliness. So noting and acknowledging what's obvious. Are you tired? Are you hungry? Anxious? Excited? What thoughts are floating through your head? Is it planning, judging, problem solving, remembering? And again, just acknowledging what's there. And then take in another breath as if you're taking yourself in just as you are. So I'm taking in my nervousness. I can feel my heart beating because I care about this. And then dropping this question into your body and seeing what emerges with curiosity. Maybe nothing will, but maybe something will. What is your intention for this time together? What's important to you? And then take that in with the breath, letting things settle. And then opening the eyes, just savoring any shifts from your radical act of stopping. Thanks, everyone. I'd like to invite you to type in the chat, what are your intentions for today? And if you feel inspired, you can also unmute yourself and voice it into the community. What's important? Okay, learning new strategies, Francie says. New strategies for what, Francie? Yes, to sit with some inspiration, faith, acknowledging this moment, learning. Okay, anything else that hasn't been typed in? Okay, so learning to be mindful during these times that feel chaotic. Great, okay. Thank you. And we are a small enough group that please make this interactive. If you are, if you have a question, if you have comments, you can just unmute yourself and speak. You can also type in the chat. Okay. So I'd like to start with a poem actually by Layli Long Soldier. And this is in response to, she's an Indigenous author, and she is responding to an apology, a national apology that was made by the Obama administration to Indigenous countries and Indigenous nations. But it was an apology that that didn't have a lot of acknowledgement of the issues, that did not really speak the truth and did not engage a lot of the people that were involved. And so this is one of her responses. Whereas my eyes land on the shoreline of the arrival of Europeans in North America, opened a new chapter in the history of Native peoples. That's a line from the apology. Because in others, I hate the act of laughing when hurt, injured, or in cases of danger. That bitter hiding. My daughter picks up a new habit from friends. She's been running, she tripped, slid on her knees, palms onto asphalt. They carry her into the kitchen. She just fell, she's bleeding. Deep red streams down her arms and legs, trails on white tile. I look at her, a smile, a laugh, a nervous laugh. Doing as her friends do, she braved a new behavior, feigned a grin. I couldn't name it, but I could spot it. Stop, my girl, if you're hurting, cry. Like that. She let it out, a flood from living room to bathroom, then a soft water pour. I washed carefully, light touch, clean cotton to bandage. I faced her, I reminded, in our home, in our family, we are ourselves. Real feelings, be true. Yet I'm serious when I say I laughed, reading the phrase, opened a new chapter. I can't help my body. I shake. The realization that it took this phrase to show that my daughter's quiver isn't new, but a deep practice, very old, she's learned watching me. So what I love about this poem, right, is this mother that believes deeply and wants to cultivate this value in her daughter of feeling her feelings, of expressing those feelings, of lamenting pain, of crying when she's in pain. And yet she learns at the end of the poem that actually her daughter learned from her how to laugh at pain, right? As she has laughed repeatedly at some of the political pain that she's experienced. And so I want to open it up with that because my session is really an invitation for us to be courageous and to feel some of the pain. Because when we feel it, we start to heal. When we feel, we start to heal. So I'd like to share the screen, share some slides, and then I'm going to pause at different times just to open up for conversation. Okay. So we are going to talk about self-compassion today as a practice of healing from everyday racism. And what are the components of self-compassion? So compassion and mindfulness are rooted in many traditions and cultures and religious practices. This one has been repackaged by Kristen Neff, who's a scholar on compassion out of the University of Texas at Austin. And I like it just because it helps to simplify this great practice. So she says there's three big components. One is mindfulness, which is truth seeing, right? Seeing what's in front of you and not minimizing or denying and not catastrophizing it. Self-kindness is then, can we respond to that truth in a way that's kind, especially when there's suffering involved, right? To meet it with kindness, fairness, with love, with a desire to alleviate it. And then there's connectedness, which is that shared humanity that one of the panelists talked about, right? This, what do we share as humans? A lot of times when we're suffering, there's a sense of vulnerability, which is a sense of aloneness, feeling like we're the only ones here. Why me? So I'd like for us to practice some of those principles in this workshop, which is one, acknowledge your feelings as they come up. You don't have to analyze them or fix them, but just a simple name it, right? Name it to tame it. Noting a little anxiety, noting a little discomfort, and then redirecting attention to the task at hand. You can ground if the emotions get overwhelming. You can ground in your breath, in your intention, and in your compassion. You can give yourself permission to participate at your own level. And vulnerability and discomfort do not equal unsafe. Okay, a lot of times when we have hard conversations, we might feel vulnerable or we might feel uncomfortable. That's usually a sign of learning and not necessarily a sign that we're being threatened. If you do feel like you're being threatened and your safety is in question, then please let me know, or just, of course, take care of yourself as you need to. And then with any difficult conversation, expect non-closure and ongoing learning. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what everyday racism looks like. And I'm not going to cover 500 years in this presentation, but I just want to give a little bit of a context for what people experience daily. And I would love it if anyone in the audience would like to add to this. So racism is institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. A lot of times when we think of racism, we think of the interpersonal level, right? Like we think of someone that's mean or uneducated or ignorant, saying something inappropriate to someone else because of their prejudice. And yes, certainly that is a type of racism. It's the interpersonal one. microaggressions or macroaggressions. The microaggressions are more of the subtle comments of like, where are you from? Are you here on scholarship? You know, are you here because you play sports? But then there are also macroaggressions, like nurses and docs getting fired because patients don't necessarily want to work with a physician of color. So that is definitely an aspect. But then there's also the institutional level that people of color experience every day, is that, and we talk about feeling holistically at home, right? The panelists talked about, can you feel at home? In predominantly white spaces, you are continuously adapting to what's considered white norms. So values, culture, what's considered to be cool, the books that are read, the values that are considered to be important, the knowledge that is valued, right? For example, ancestral knowledge is not considered evidence-based knowledge. And so thus it's not as valued in institutions like Research One, institutions like ours, right? But there is a lot of validity and it has its own science. So that's an example, for example, of institutional racism. And then representation is a big one. If you don't see yourself in leadership, if you don't see yourself in your field, there is a huge sense of not belonging. I shouldn't be here, right? It creates a sense of imposter syndrome, for example. Then that leads us to the internalized racism, feeling like I gotta work twice as hard, okay? I can't ask for promotions, or I can't apply for, you know, that higher position because I'm not meeting the standards. I'm not speaking, you know, the language. I'm not producing in the way that, in the standards that have been established for me. So all of these are related. Today, I want to focus a little bit more on microaggressions, just because that's what I was invited to do, so I'm going to do that. And also because it offers us a concrete place to start. Microaggressions are commonplace verbal, behavioral, or environmental actions that communicate hostility towards oppressed or targeted groups, right? So, and these groups can be people that identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color. They also include people that identify as women. They also include people that identify as LGBTQIA, and so on. Religious minorities as well. I'm not going to show that. But just to clarify, because it's important, just because it sounds like a minor thing, micro, right? The impact is not micro, because these microaggressions occur repeatedly, day in and day out, right? So it leads to what Dr. William Smith here at the U has coined to be racial battle fatigue, which is the fatigue or the burnout that occurs from continually having to respond to microaggressions, or trying to adapt and belong in norms that you don't necessarily feel at home, or feeling like your knowledge and your history are devalued, right? And there are physiological and there's physical and mental health impact from microaggressions. So you see some of them here: increase in depression, anxiety, and trauma, increased suicidality. There's correlation with heart attacks, hypertension, hospitalization, and of course, a mistrust of service providers or authorities in general. The biggest, for me, I think that the biggest impact that perhaps is the umbrella that covers all of the other is just that deep sense of belonging that is impacted, right? And we know that relationships, we know that connection is a powerful predictor of health and mental health and even mortality. And then the other piece is the sense of self-efficacy, or again, that trust in self and the confidence. So how can we minimize the impact of this kind of harm? And I'd like to offer this quote by Audre Lorde, who was a scholar and an activist. And she brought, she wrote about self-care when self-care wasn't cool and wasn't trendy. This was in the 60s and 70s. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. The reason that it's an act of political warfare is because she's resisting institutions and systems that are devaluing her humanity, right? But what we know is that even though caring for ourselves, being kind to ourselves is important, perhaps, but we have a lot of myths about it. So I just want to invite you to take a moment and reflect on what are some quick associations when you that come to mind when you think of self-compassion. Do you think, oh, it's a waste of time, it's too soft, who has time for that? I need to be hard on myself so I can get my butt into gear and achieve what I need to achieve. Or how did you grow up? What was self-compassion, or what was the response like from family members when there were challenges, or when there was when there were mistakes made, or a sense of failure of some kind? So maybe take a look at this and see if any of these resonate with you. And actually, I think I'll stop here because I think the myth is important. Did those myths resonate with anyone? Do you hold any of those beliefs?
I used to think that self-compassion was weakness in a sense, that, or like being able to like have time to reflect on yourself and what you need. Like it wasn't okay for some reason, just because that's something that I never grew up with. And so just that thought of like being considered weak for taking care of yourself is something that has been perpetuated for me, like for most of my adult life.
Yeah, thanks, Gabby. Anyone else?
I kind of saw it like growing up that you shouldn't, not that you shouldn't take care of yourself, but you should just push yourself harder, right? That it is kind of a sign of weakness. And if you feel that you should be like taking care of yourself, and maybe you aren't pushing yourself hard enough, but I've come to realize that that's a myth.
Thank you. Yeah. Great. Anyone else? Maybe just one more person if you're up for it. Oh, okay. Beliefs about self-compassion, Chantelle, was what?
Okay. I'm like, I'll add something.
Yeah, sure.
I really like the poem that you read at the beginning, because we were taught growing up that you don't cry. And also, I think with different experiences that I had growing up, we were, and these are conversations that I've recently been having with my siblings, we do not show, one of our defense mechanisms is not to show when we've been hurt. right? So somebody could be demeaning, degrading, insulting, and inside we're dying, we're in pain, but we will not give that person the satisfaction of seeing that they're hurting us. But then that's something that still stays internal, and there's still that pain, and that person still goes on doing the things that they do. So like with us, right, it was like, you don't cry. My dad was always saying, I'll give you a reason to cry. Like, stop crying or I'll give you a reason to cry. So I've had many trainings with you on mindfulness, and learning self-compassion is one of the hardest things that I've had to do. Still work in progress.
I know, it's a practice. Same here. My dad, whenever I cried, my dad said, why are you crying? Don't cry. Stop crying. The funny thing is that it only made me cry more.
Right.
But yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, Chantelle, is that there are times when we cannot cry, right? There are times when it's not safe to show your emotion, and that is valid, right? So there's a time and place for things. But the cool thing about tears, as I've learned, is that it cleanses, it releases. It's like we have our own cleansing fluid. It's pretty, it's a form of release, which is pretty amazing. But yeah, there's a time and place for those tears.
Right.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the benefits. Okay. Some of the benefits of self-compassion is it's just an efficient way to recover from injuries. So let's say if you fall down, if you have a little bit of kindness and check in, rub your knees, and then you get back up and you say, oh, that happens, right? That's a lot more efficient use of your energy than if you fall down, you kick yourself once or twice and you say, stupid, what's wrong with you? You should have known better, right? That takes a lot more energy. And that adds to the suffering of your fall. So what research has shown, and there's been a lot of research on self-compassion, that with self-compassion, there's more resilience, right? The ability to bounce back from challenges, from difficulties. It leads to more physical health, more happiness, and supportive relationships, just all of the good health factors. So we know that, but we're actually countering a natural instinct, because when we're stressed, the response is to fight, flight, and freeze. So it's a natural physiological reaction that we get from our stress hormones. And the easiest person, the easiest target to fight, flight, and freeze is, guess who? Us, right? We're not going to fight our boss. We're not going to fight our colleague. It's just not that easy. So we are going to fight, and maybe take a look at this and see which one you're more of, right? Like, are you more of a fighter, a flighter, a freezer, or maybe you're multi-talented and you do all three? So if you're a fighter, then you tend to self-criticize. You might say, you fight yourself, right? Stupid, what's wrong? You know better than that, Trinh. You know you should have done better. You could have prepared more, right? Flight is you just withdraw, and you might numb it out. Another way to flight is numbing it out, self-medication, right? And then freeze is the rumination. And we do this, if you think about a time that you've had experience of a microaggression, for example, or a difficulty with another person or with work, is we might, instead of saying, wow, that was a microaggression, right? We might say, come on, Trinh, don't be so sensitive, okay? You're overanalyzing things. I'm sure they didn't mean anything by that. Stop being so weak. Stop being so soft, okay? Or you might ruminate on it. You might replay that conversation. It was a 1-minute conversation, right? I've done this, 1-minute conversation, ruminate on it for the whole weekend, hoping for a different outcome. So all of these things are normal. And then a lot of people also talk about, right, like the other effects of these things is if you ruminate and you isolate, we tend to then like turn to alcohol, or you turn to, food and just all kinds of other things in order to cope with some of these difficult responses. And the model for self-compassion is saying, hey, you know what, it can actually be easier if you just relate and talk to yourself in a kind way, as if you're a friend to yourself. So instead of the self-criticism, can you just say, wow, that was hard. What do you need, right? The common humanity, you're not alone in this. Other people go through this, reach out to someone. You come from a strong lineage of ancestors that have been through this, and you too are strong. The rumination, right? Instead of just replaying, maybe just acknowledging, speaking the truth. Wow, I feel heartbroken about that. Or I feel angry about that. These are the steps broken down for healing from a difficult microaggression or a difficult interaction or a stressful interaction. Take a breath. So simple, so trite, but it slows down the nervous system. Helps you to see a little bit of more perspective. Acknowledge, connect, and support. Acknowledge your feelings and experience. Connect. I'm not alone here. Remember your community of present and your past, and then support yourself. And if you're not into self-kindness, you can be fair to yourself, right? What's fair here? If you talk about what you've done wrong, can you look at what went well? What did I do right? Right? And then asking yourself, what do I need now and what do I need later? And I'm going to talk a little bit about just what self-kindness means. It doesn't have to mean a lot. We don't need a lot to sustain ourselves, which is really cool. But sometimes the simplest things are the easiest things to forget and to ignore because perhaps they're too simple. We don't want to waste our time on it. So some simple things. If you're come home to your body, deep breaths, a hand to the part that hurts, right? Your head, your heart, and that hand, even though it sounds touchy-feely, and maybe some of you aren't into that, but research has shown that a warm touch, the way that we touch a child, right, when they fall and we pat their back and we rub their backs, that touch reduces cortisol, which is the stress hormone in the body. It increases oxytocin, which is the relationship hormone, which gives us a sense of connection. And that is super healing when you're going through a hard time. Of course, walking, moving, that breaks the rumination because it's movement. If you're more of an emotional person, offering yourself words of understanding and encouragement. You got this. You've been through hard things. You will get through this too. This too shall pass. And then if you're more of a cognitive person, maybe reappraising the situation once you've taken a breath. Am I okay right now? How threatening is this? How can I turn my pain into power? Right? And then I want to highlight this, which is that, a lot of times we think of self-compassion as the nurturing mama bear, like the kind of the nurturing mother, the soothing, comforting, validating. But there's a fear side of self-compassion. So for example, if your daughter, okay, I guess I'm just saying daughter because I have one. If my daughter is, has been on her couch, on her bed for the whole day, she hasn't gotten out of her bed, right? She's been watching TV and been on her phone the whole day. I'm not going to go in and say, hey, honey, just keep doing that, right? It's okay. That's what you need right now. I'm going to be more of the kind of the fierce, protective mom that's going to come in and with kindness. I'm not going to whip her out of her bed, but I might say, hey, what's up? You know, you've been in there for a whole day, and how else do you want to spend your day, right? Motivating her to do things that are for her own good. And I love this side because it's super helpful for resisting and for responding to racism or all of the other forms of racism, right? We know that people of color, we know that as women, we need to advocate for example, our salaries, for promotions, because there is a huge disparity in those areas. We do a lot of unpaid labor or devalued labor. So we need that self-kindness to say we are worth it, and we are going to prepare to advocate for ourselves, as well as advocating for other communities that are marginalized. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask you to share your experience with healing and resisting systems of oppression, whether they be racism or sexism or any of classism. So this is a little bit of a bigger ask, right? Because it's asking for a little bit of your story here.
I just want to share, because I giggled, Trin, when I read it, was I'm a freezer. I was like, oh, I ruminate like crazy. Yeah, that was kind of helpful to see that. Thank you.
That's funny. I'm a freezer. Just the image of the freezer comes to mind. How do you work with that, Kim?
I'll be honest, I think I've disclosed this to you in the past, not well. I think I've just kind of rolled with the rumination. But I think actually, like, for example, I'll speak to sexism. Racism is not something I can speak to probably personally with any meaningful contribution, but I have ruminated and ruminated and ruminated, and then I have disclosed. So I have shared with people in positions of power or authority, you know, that this problem has happened or this action has occurred. It's the what comes after when nothing happens that feels like really diminishing. So it's sort of like it invalidates the fact that you had an experience, and then there's just no further action. I'm sure many of you have many more stories. So I think the way you get past it is just to, I think the common humanity is kind of the thing that I've wound up doing. I'm not the only person who experiences this. I think unfortunately most women do. And it's just to try to avoid situations where that might happen or occur. Educate my daughters to the best of my ability that these things happen, and that they are empowered and confident and strong, and it doesn't diminish, you know, it's not you. So it's, yeah, that's how I've kind of handled it, I guess.
Yeah.
No,
thanks, Kim. That's great.
Can I add on to Kim's? So adding on to that, I've had those experiences too. I've also have perceived that after I have tried to express concern or stand up for whatever situation, the person, I've had to validate everything that I say or every accusation that came my way, but the person that made the accusations, which were false, there was no going back, right? So the person that came to me and said, you're being accused of this, this, and this, so I had to prove and show everything that was not what this person was saying, then that person never went back to the person accusing me. And so I went back like a year, like it was over months. Are you gonna bring this up? Are you gonna address this? Because it was inappropriate what happened. And that person did not feel the need. So it feels like in some ways by me saying something, I have been pushed off to this like kind of almost removed from a group or pushed out of a group. And this other person that made the accusations is being rewarded. And you're such an awesome employee and you're the best. And do you know what I mean? And that has been, and I feel when Kim says it's disheartening, you feel devalued, that is difficult. And yet the more I feel like the more we bring it up or point it out, the more we're set aside or not included in conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Chantelle. I have a lot of thoughts about that, but I want to open it up to see if others have thoughts about that. Jewel, did you unmute?
I did. I was just going to speak to the fact of self-worth. You know, I grew up on the reservation and, you know, I was never Native enough to be with the Native kids or white enough to be with the white kids. And so it really got to my self-worth. And even as an adult, I still feel like I'm still fighting to be Indian enough or white enough, or, you know, figuring out who I am. And now since I live in Salt Lake City and I'm away from home, you know, it's also taken away from that as like that part of me. But I still fight like internally on a daily basis, especially, you know, with work, you know, it's like, am I doing enough? And then I end up pushing myself so hard that I'm overly exhausted. And so I'm always trying to find that balance of like, okay, you got to give yourself a break of, whether it's like taking 15 minutes, like walking your dogs or just stepping away from your computer, like you had suggested at the beginning of this session, like stand up, go, you know, you've been on Zoom calls all day and all of that.
Thank you, Jewel. So it sounds like you are starting to talk to yourself in that kind of friendly, that loving coach kind of voice. That's awesome. That's the practice of self-compassion. And I also love that you talked about self-worth, because essentially the premise behind self-compassion is that self-worth is unconditional. Self-worth is unconditional. Self-worth is not about your productivity, which, right, I grew up with that. It's like, what have you done? How productive are you? Who have you helped? Self-worth is not about your professional excellence. Self-worth is not about how native you are or how, I don't know, how mainstream or, you know, how adept you are at passing and succeeding, right, in a dominant world. Self-worth is not about being perfect. Self-worth is simply about the fact that you are a human being. And that's so hard to remember because we get so many messages that are otherwise all day. So I want to, I want to also get back to what was said earlier about the advocacy piece, that often, right, like I feel like there's this message of speak up, stand up for your rights, but really, and we don't acknowledge, so here's that acknowledge piece again. And I see a lot of folks that are from marginalized identities doing the bulk of the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And often that work is personal and painful, right? And then often that work isn't necessarily financially rewarded. So it's more unpaid labor. And then that work also comes with emotional risk and professional risk, right? So it's interesting that in trying to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion, we're putting the marginalized populations at more risk for burnout. And that's, you know, I heard that, Chantelle, when you were talking, is that the battles don't turn out. It's not like you ask for things and then people just say, oh yeah, you're right. You know, we just need to change that. No, it's you almost have to prove that your trauma is real, right? And that is re-traumatizing. And so I say that because, again, bringing that compassion and that fairness to yourself, that this work is hard and it requires you to take a lot of risk and energy. And so being fair to yourself means also keeping yourself in mind. You know, how can I, choosing your battles? You can't fight all the battles, right? And you can't fight the battle if you are tired and burn out. It's okay for you to give yourself a break, regenerate, and then come back. And then the other thing I want to say about self-compassion is self-compassion helps me to see parts of myself that I don't want to see, including that I am human and I make mistakes and I commit microaggressions, right? Like even a person that does this work and has done this work for many years, I say things that are hurtful, that are ignorant, because I breathe the same air, okay? It doesn't mean, so I want to get away from this, you know, there's the good, educated people, and then there's the bad, you know, people. There's no good or bad. We all breathe a dominant culture, right? Dominant norms that are heterosexist, that are racist, sexist, classist. And so things are going to come out of our mouths that end up hurting people. And so self-compassion is a reminder that you're human, you make mistakes. And the cool thing about that is that gives you the strength then to apologize, right? And so when you do make a mistake with microaggressions, apologize, focus on impact before intention. Impact before intention. Right? I'm so sorry that hurt you. The gut instinct, and I found myself apologizing to my partner this morning. I wanted to explain myself. And then I thought, wait, I'm going to teach this today, so I should practice what I preach. So I said, okay, I'm going to apologize. And then all of this energy wanting to explain myself wanted to come out, but I kept it in and I just left it at an apology. I'm sorry I hurt you. Instead of, I'm sorry I hurt you, but I didn't mean to because I was thinking this and that, right? You focus on their hurt first. And then you take care of yourself later. You might reach out to a friend. You might just give a hand to your heart and say, oh, that didn't feel good that you said that, right? But what can you learn from that for next time? So giving yourself that compassion after you apologize and focus on the person that's most impacted. All right. So I have, I want to offer a couple of resources. I don't know how to share slides with you. I wonder if we can do that. But the Resiliency Center is offering a couple of resources primarily for BIPOC. One is a self-compassion workshop for BIPOC that's happening February 17th. And so you can email me if you're interested. And then there's also a BIPOC check-in that is weekly at 12 to 1. And that's open to everyone at the U. We also offer individual consults for folks that are in U Health. And then if you are outside of U Health, if you want to reach out to me, I can also connect you with other resources that you might need. Okay. All right. I think I have 1 minute. So any questions or last comments that are kind of stirring inside that you would really like to share with people?
I just want to express gratitude to you, Trinh. I always feel so wonderful after going to like the check-ins and the workshops that you provide, and for allowing this space where we can be vulnerable and discuss like what we're dealing with and what we have interacted with. And I feel like something that has stayed with me is that racism is internalized with the imposter syndrome. And I think that is especially prevalent in me. And I don't know if it's just because I'm a woman, a first gen student, like a Latina, like trying to succeed in a white institution. So like, I'm going to like, that's something new that I'm taking today that I'm going to try to like to reimagine and re-examine in myself. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, folks with marginalized identities are at more risk for imposter syndrome, right? Yeah. So let's go ahead and take a moment of kindness for ourselves before we hop on to the next thing. Just lower your gaze, take in a big breath, maybe a big sigh. And perhaps just taking a moment to check in with yourself. What would you like to remember from this session? What would you like to remember and carry forward from this session? And then giving yourself a little gratitude for showing up today, for sharing, for listening. Okay. As you're ready, you can reconnect. Thank you so much. I think I can hang out a little for questions if there's any. Other than that, take good care of yourselves.